Liberalism. It's a word we hear in headlines, on campus, in law courts, and at kitchen tables. For some, it's liberty, progress, and human rights. For others, it's an ideology that opened the door to inequality, empire, or soulless markets. But where did it come from? And how did a set of ideas shape the modern world? In the next 25 minutes, we'll trace liberalism's origin stories, its transformations, its victories, and its failures, and ask, did it make the world better or worse? Let's get into it. Origins, from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. Liberalism didn't appear fully formed. It grew out of centuries of change. The Renaissance and Reformation loosened old hierarchies. The printing press spread ideas. Then came the Enlightenment, thinkers who argued that reason, individual conscience, and consent mattered. John Locke, writing in the 17th century, framed the idea that people have natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that governments must be based on consent, not divine right. Reason in individual rights, consent of the governed, limits on monarchs. These ideas fed political revolutions, the English Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, and later the French Revolution, each trying to put individual rights and government accountability at the center of politics. But important early liberal thinkers didn't all agree. Some emphasized property and order, others equality and reform. That tension runs through liberalism's history. Political liberalism. Constitutions, parliaments, elections, independent courts. Political liberalism turned ideas into institutions. Constitutions, parliaments, elections, independent courts, tools to restrain arbitrary power. These institutions introduced accountability. Kings and governors can no longer rule unchecked. Over time, franchises expanded. First, property owners, later broader male suffrage, and finally, universal suffrage in many countries. That institutional architecture mattered. It protected speech, property, and offered predictable laws. When it worked, it made societies more peaceful and allowed commerce, science, and culture to flourish. But there were limits. Early liberal politics often tolerated class privilege and excluded women, colonized people abroad, and many working-class citizens. Economic liberalism and the Industrial Revolution. Another pillar of liberal thought was economic, laissez-faire, free markets, and trade. Thinkers like Adam Smith argued that markets, competition, and limited state interference could generate prosperity. Combined with new technologies, this idea fueled the Industrial Revolution. Rapid growth and productivity, cities swelling, new products, rising living standards for many. But industrial liberalism came with a cost. Urban squalor, dangerous factories, low wages, and child labor were real. Market-driven growth created enormous wealth, but often concentrated it. Critics said that markets alone could be harsh, and states needed to step in to protect the vulnerable. This would set up one of liberalism's central debates: how big should the state be? Liberalism and civil rights, freedom, equality, and the struggle for inclusion. Liberal ideals, freedom and equality, inspired powerful emancipation movements. Abolitionists used liberal arguments to attack slavery. Suffragists used them to demand the vote for women. Later, civil rights activists extended the promise of equal citizenship to racial and ethnic minorities. Liberalism supplied the language of universal rights. Yet, the record is mixed. Many liberal states maintained slavery, colonized peoples abroad, and only gradually extended rights at home. The gap between liberal principles and practice often required social movements to close it. Those movements borrowed liberal rhetoric, forced institutions to expand, and slowly redefined who the people included. Liberalism, imperialism, and global consequences. Here's a difficult truth. The spread of liberal states often coincided with the expansion of European empires. Liberal powers claimed to bring trade, rule of law, and civilization, but imperial rule also meant domination, resource extraction, cultural suppression, and violence. The tension between liberal self-rule at home and imperial rule abroad is one of liberalism's biggest contradictions. Rule of law at home, imperial domination abroad. Anti-colonial movements in the 20th century used liberal language to demand self-determination. Eventually, many colonies gained independence. The result was complex. Some newly independent states adopted liberal constitutions, others faced Cold War pressures, economic dependency, and political instability. The legacy of empire still shapes global inequality today. Social liberalism and the welfare state. To respond to market failure and political unrest, many liberal democracies reinvented themselves. Social liberalism argued the state should guarantee a baseline of security, public education, pensions, health, unemployment insurance. The welfare state aimed to marry freedom with social protection so that individuals could meaningfully exercise choice. These policies reduced extreme poverty, expanded opportunity, and stabilized societies. But critics, on the left and right, argued about costs, dependency, and bureaucratic overreach. The 1970s and 1980s would usher in a sharp critique of big government. Neoliberal turn, market primacy, globalization. In the late 20th century, a new version of liberalism, often called neoliberalism, reasserted markets as the primary engine of progress. Deregulation, privatization, and free trade became policy mantras. Globalization accelerated capital flows, created global supply chains, and lifted many into new jobs and consumer choices. The results are contested. Many regions experience rapid growth and fewer people living in extreme poverty. Yet, globalization also contributed to job displacement, wage stagnation in some sectors, rising inequality in many countries, and political dislocation. The promise that markets alone would deliver broad prosperity proved incomplete. Backlash, populism, culture wars, and trust crises. Fast forward to today, liberal institutions and economic arrangements face fierce backlash. Economic insecurity, cultural change, and perceived elitism have fed populist movements from many points on the political spectrum. Social media amplifies grievances, and trust in institutions has eroded in many places. Critics say liberalism ignored community ties and cultural identities, or that it prioritized markets over people. Supporters counter that liberal protections for minorities, for dissenting ideas, for scientific progress remain crucial. The result is an intense debate: how to renew liberalism so it delivers fairness and belonging. Conclusion and reflection. So, did liberalism make the world better or worse? The honest answer? Both. Liberalism helped build institutions that expanded rights, science, commerce, and personal freedom. It also coexisted with exclusion, inequality, empire, and market failures. Its strength has always been adaptability, contested, revised, and reshaped by social movements, wars, and political choice. The question for our time is this: can we keep liberalism's commitment to individual rights while correcting its blind spots, inequality, exclusion, environmental limits, so that its benefits reach more people? That's not an abstract debate. It's about how we organize economies, write laws, and cultivate civic life. If you found this helpful, like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's one liberal idea you think we should keep and one we should change?